Ladies and gentlemen, dear shareholders of Prismo, welcome to Prismo in the News. It's our second one. Today we'll be reviewing our last two press releases. I'm joined today by our President and CEO, Craig Gibson. And today we also have a special guest, Steve Robertson, known to a lot of our shareholders. Steve is a technical advisor on our Hot Breccia project, which we'll get to talk about here in a minute, and I'll have Steve introduce himself. But before we talk about the last two news releases, I thought that Craig and I could debrief our shareholders on PDAC. Prismo Metals had a booth at PDAC. Craig and I and some of our colleagues were there. We're there every year. So, Craig, why don't you share your experience? Was it worth your time? Did you meet anyone interesting? Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Alain. Yeah, as you said, I was at PDAC, and I think it was very well attended this year. It was a bit better than last year's, and perhaps, well, probably definitely the best since the pandemic. So I think things are picking up. Mood was pretty positive overall. Had the precious metal prices up just before the PDAC. But I think also interesting was we had a lot of people come by, particularly interested in the Hot Breccia property. And as you said, we had a couple news releases just before the PDAC. So it was, I think it was pretty telling that everybody was interested in that. Some interested, of course, in our Mexico projects, but overall, I think everybody was really interested in what we're doing at Hot Breccia.
Yes, thank you, Craig. And as I mentioned, being there, I share your summary of the event. There was a good buzz. There was, well, I mean, it helps when gold's at 2,100, but yes, it was well attended and a good buzz overall, and a lot of interest on Hot Breccia. I know you had some rocks and some pictures, and maybe that's where we go now, and maybe we don't start with the press releases, and maybe I'll ask you, Craig, to summarize some of the more recent work and the more recent findings at Hot Breccia. You were with the team doing field work for weeks just recently. So could you update our shareholders on the latest field work at Hot Breccia?
Yes, well, as you said, we spent 2 weeks there just before the PDAC, and basically getting a feel for the rocks there. I walked a considerable distance over the ground, not just in the mineralized area, but all the way around it. And as you said, we had some rocks and pictures which we can show here later. But this, we found some very nice exposures of fragments of high-grade copper mineralization encompassed in some of the intrusions there in the area of the namesake Hot Breccia. So we've identified several mineralized trends there with copper and probably other minerals or other metals such as gold we found previously. We sent 32 samples into the lab, so we don't have results on those, but I think they'll be pretty well mineralized. They're from a lot of small mines and prospects in the area, and I think we get a pretty good handle on the mineralized system there. And we're going forward with everything we can with the geology and preparation for drilling later this year.
And when do you expect to get the results from these samples?
I think we'd have them, sometime in March. I'm not sure what the turnaround time is right now, but I assume with relatively low-level activity at the beginning of the year, maybe we'll have those in a couple of weeks or before the end of March. So we could look forward to that.
Thank you. So why don't I bring you in, Steve, and we can dive into the last two press releases. The last two press releases focus on geophysics that we did at the project. One is the actual initial results of that work, and the second news release, which we issued during PDAC, is the hiring of a group that It's going to help us further understand the results, compute them, and come up with the best possible targets. Before you comment on that, Steve, for those who don't know you, maybe a brief history and your connection to the Hot Breccia project, which dates back a few years.
All right. Yeah, thanks very much, Alain, for having me along today. So I'm a geologist, exploration geologist by background. I spent 24 years with an operating company in British Columbia called Imperial Metals, and worked on every spectrum of the mining industry during that time. So right from grassroots exploration through development, operations, and closure as well. And got a good breadth of experience. The biggest project that I probably worked on was Red Chris, where I oversaw the deep drilling program there that took Red Chris from being what everybody thought was another typical little BC porphyry and proved that it was a world-class giant. And about 5 years ago, I turned entrepreneur and started to work on the public company side, running junior mining companies. Made a nice discovery with Peter McGaw, who's also working with Prismo in northern British Columbia. A discovery hole there was 100 meters of 5% copper. And then I started a company called Infinitum Copper, focused on a project down in Mexico. But we wanted to branch out and have a little bit of diversity in the portfolio. So was looking around for other projects, and we came across Hot Breccia, which, is, first of all, it's in elephant country. This is the Arizona Copper Belt is one of the most productive copper belts on the face of the planet. And it's sandwiched right in between several world-class deposits. San Manuel, which was North America's first block cave operation, is 35 kilometers to the south of us. Morenci, which is one of the biggest copper deposits in the world, is 100 kilometers to the east. And Resolution, which I consider to be one of the greatest exploration discovery stories in our industry, is only 40 kilometers to the north. And Resolution is an absolute giant. So we were certainly in the right area. And the geologic setting at Hot Breccia is very strikingly similar to Resolution. And so those two factors, and plus the fact that it really hadn't seen a lot of work in the past. There's been a half a dozen deep drill holes that were drilled back, more than 50 years ago on the project. It was a pretty compelling opportunity for us to get into that. And the company Infinitum Copper didn't have the resources to do both Adelita and Hot Breccia at the same time. So we brought in Prismo, who took the opportunity to take an option to earn 75% of the project. And I actually signed on as a technical advisor with Prismo because I really do love the project and want to see it succeed. So that's brought us to today.
And back to you, Craig. We did a lot of work on the property last year, as our shareholders know. And then you felt that and Steve also felt and Peter, all of our technical people felt the next step was the ZTEM study. Craig, could you explain to our shareholders briefly what that is, what it's meant to do, to achieve, and what are some of the conclusions, Craig, you came to after analyzing the geophysics results?
Yes, well, the CTEM is basically an airborne geophysical method that uses both magnetics and electromagnetics to look at the crust of the Earth. And this particular method looks very deep, which is what we need to do at Hot Breccia. We're looking below the surface exposures from a half kilometer to a kilometer plus depth, and basically flew that middle of last year, just before the middle of last year, and we waited for the results. But then we've had somebody working on the interpretation of it, and show some really compelling anomalies. Basically, we have magnetic highs surrounding a magnetic low in the center of the system. It's kind of typical of porphyry systems. But we also have in the center of the system a resistivity low, or a conductive body, which is very compelling. It's basically before the area of of past exploration, which was done by a major copper exploration company, and they had a reason for being there. They dropped the property when the copper price dropped, but that doesn't mean it's a bad property. And we have some pretty good results from those historic drill holes. But now we have another reason to believe there may be something even better at depth underneath those drill holes. So that's our goal, is to explore that basically resistivity low or conductive anomaly.
And when you compare our results to what is seen at our neighbors, the Christmas mine, and obviously public information, how does that compare between them and us when what we have or may have?
Well, we really have a very similar geologic scenario there. The Christmas mine was a historic producer from high-grade skarns exposed at the surface and in shallow underground workings. And these skarns were replacement deposits in carbonate rocks. They're favorable units for forming mineralization. And since that mine was shut down, the current owner of the project, Freeport, has drilled off a porphyry system to the east of the historic workings. And the historic workings were about 360 million pounds of copper produced in the past. And this area that was drilled off, it's not a resource right now, it's an inventory under Freeport's books, but it's about 6 times the size of the original high-grade working. So they've got a large porphyry system, but interestingly enough, they have high-grade skarns at depth. Now, this is to the east of the old porphyry, or the old skarn workings, and these are high-grade intercepts at 400 to 500 meters plus below the surface. And that's kind of the similar situation we have at Hot Breccia. If you look at our figure 2 from our news release, we have a very similar situation with down-dropped, favorable host rocks, where we know we have mineralization from these historic drill holes. We don't have all the data from those holes, but we know there's significant and important mineralization there. So we think we have potentially not only this high-grade skarns similar to the eastern portion of Christmas, but also a potential porphyry system. And our goal is to drill that out later this year, and we're looking forward to doing that.
So, Steve, over to you now. If you could summarize for our investors, what attracted you to the project historically? Craig mentioned data about some historical drill holes, and given the recent work that Prismo has done, geophysics and so on, does that make you even more excited about the prospects for Hot Breccia?
Yeah, the geophysics are really compelling. Exactly what we were looking for, really. The thing that originally attracted me to this was the fact that the last work that was done in the area was 50 years ago, and it ended when the Christmas mine shut down. So it didn't end because they weren't having good results. The only mining operation that was in the area shut down, and so people packed up and went away. But the story was certainly unfinished. And then subsequent to that, Resolution being discovered 40 kilometers to the north has really had a major impact on, I think, on the potential that we see at Hot Breccia, because it was very similar situation. Next door to Resolution was a little mine called Magma, where they produced about 20 million tons of very high grade mineralization. So small tonnage, but 5% copper. So, great little deposit, but, the geologists were thinking there must be something at the root of this system, and they followed it down and actually found the Resolution, which is 1.6 billion tons of 1.6% copper, and might not be drilled off yet. So absolutely giant deposit, very high grade mineralization. We've got the same situation. Next door to us is the Christmas mine. 25 million tons of 1.5% copper was produced there, and we're hoping that if we follow that system down to its roots, we may have something. Now, it's not just the fact that Christmas is next door. Well, the namesake of the property, the Hot Breccia, really is proof positive that we have an active hydrothermal system at depth. We've got these breccias that come up through the cover rocks, and they bring up fragments of the rocks from, we think, probably 400 meters to a kilometer below surface. And when we see those rocks, they're a different rock type. They're the carbonates and intrusives. They're altered and mineralized. And, that's a pretty good indication that there's an active system percolating down at depth that could have caused a much larger ore body down there. So we're really encouraged, as Craig said, to get some drill holes down there and test the thesis and see if it comes true.
So let's talk about drilling then. So next step for us is to get a permit. The three of us, we speak to investors all the time, and there seems to be this perception that permitting in Arizona is a difficult thing to achieve, and maybe I'll remind our investors that it's BLM ground where we are, and there are old roads, and we use these roads when we go on property with our Jeeps or four-wheelers, and old drilling pads. So there is a permitting process. If you use the old infrastructure and do not disrupt more than 5 acres of land, it's fairly streamlined, an approval process. And that's the path that we're following. And so we expect, as we noted in the last press release, to get the drilling permit in short order. I'll go on a limb, and you guys don't need to correct me, except if I'm materially wrong. But I would say hopefully by the end of April. So let's hope on that, and at least it gives investor a feeling for what we're talking about here. We're not talking 6 to 12 months, and then once we get that, we'll go drilling. So there's been a number of theories, plans that we've discussed internally, what to do next. I don't think that there's a final plan, but Craig, why don't you, what would you recommend that Prismo does in terms of drilling?
Well, really, the most obvious thing is to duplicate some of the information we have from the historical drilling. So the idea is to drill some sort of a twin hole or a similar hole to what was done in the past and confirm those results. Get a really hands-on feel for the mineralization as it occurs. Again, we just have a small amount of information from those historic drill holes. We don't have any core. We have some assays and not much else. So the idea is to write off, is get an idea of what they found previously, and it may be a direct twin of the best hole, or based on our geology or physics, it may be do another hole that's similar, test a similar target nearby. But we're thinking of drilling about 5,000 meters, so we have several long holes we could do, and I personally think we should also do a couple of shorter holes. We have near surface gold mineralization with some copper that we've defined and see there. So we think maybe a couple of short angle holes across structural zones that have particularly high grades near the surface is probably a good idea in this first pass also. So we can see not only very deep mineralization and the extension of the historic drilling, but also something maybe that hasn't been tested in the past.
And Steve, you're a geologist who has a long experience in drilling deep holes, and this is deep hole territory. So could you discuss what the depth versus what you've done in the past and been successful at doing, and also maybe comment when you talk about depth, we go back to the dinner we all had with Peter in Tucson, and I think his view is, let's not be shy to drill down and really see what's down there.
Yeah, well, resolution, again, I hate to keep on bringing up that deposit, but that was really a good demonstration of what you can do if you are bold enough to take a deep shot. And of course, they're not for the faint of heart. But when I was at Red Chris, we drilled well over 100 holes there that were all more than a kilometer deep, and I think the deepest one was 1.8 kilometers. Resolution starts at 1.2 kilometers below surface and goes down to 2 kilometers below surface. We're a little bit better off at Hot Breccia because our target horizon starts maybe 400 meters down, and we think it goes down to 1,000 or maybe 12 or 1,300 meters. So much shallower than our neighbors to the north. But those are still deep holes. They take a lot of technical expertise. But what I will say is the industry's come a long ways in the last 15 years since I started drilling my first deep holes. There's a lot of companies that are doing it now, and the drillers have really picked up their game and seem to be much more adept at it. Their power plants that they've got on the drills are much bigger and more powerful and better capable of handling the deep depths.
That's great. Thank you. And as a conclusion, unless Craig or Steve, if you want to add anything else, I have a quick conclusion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. So let's not forget about our two other projects. So Palos Verdes, which we drilled with a lot of success in the last 2 years. As we announced in previous news releases, we're getting ready to drill again off of the Vizsla silver property. So more on that shortly. And maybe my last conclusion, I'm actually going to turn it into a question for you, Craig. So Los Pavitos, again, we drilled last year, really thrilled with the results to date. And I think before we drill again, Craig, you want to do some geophysics, so you might want to explain what you have in mind and why you recommend that we do this as the next step.
Well, with Los Pavitos, we had extraordinary results, really, but it's a big project. There's several kilometer plus long structural zones that we're looking at for hosting mineralization. Most of the best surface results that we have were in one area, and we had spectacular drill results there, but we also stepped out on areas around this to drill a few holes just to test some of the structures that don't have such spectacular surface results. And we had pretty good results overall. We also saw some areas where we have what we call indicator elements associated with these structures, and these are elements that are associated with gold where we do have gold. So we think in these areas we need to focus down a little bit more, either along strike on the structural zone or at depth. And one of the best ways and most cost-effective ways to do that is by geophysics. And we're thinking either a ground or a drone-based magnetic survey over the area of the project, which again, we've only tested maybe around 50% of it in a detailed way. So we have a lot of other targets we're going to be generating, and we can fly all this with the drone or by ground magnetics and cover it very quickly, cost effectively, and generate what we think will generate some drill targets based on the areas that we know have gold. So we can focus down future work to smaller areas and not test new areas by drilling. We'll test them by geophysics and then confirm those hopefully by drilling.
Well, thank you very much. And Steve, thank you for joining us. I know for sure you'll be on subsequent podcasts reviewing results at Hot Breccia. So once again, thank you to our investors, our shareholders for their support. And do not hesitate to reach out to me or Craig directly. Happy to take your calls anytime. Thank you very much.